Judge James Boasberg thought his robe would save him from being unveiled, not knowing Karoline Leavitt had other plans. For years, Boasberg had presided over his courtroom with an air of authority, his decisions often seen as the final word in matters of law. But beneath the surface of his judicial demeanor, whispers of questionable actions had begun to circulate. Whispers that Leavitt, the sharp and determined White House press secretary, had picked up on. She wasn't the type to let things slide, especially when her instincts told her something was deeply wrong. Karoline Leavitt had been serving as press secretary since January 2025, making history as the youngest person to ever hold the position at just 27 years old. Her reputation for digging into issues that others overlooked was already well established. She had a knack for uncovering truths, a skill she'd honed during her time as a political spokesperson and communicator, including her role as National Press Secretary for President Trump's 2024 campaign. When she first heard rumors about Judge Boasberg's involvement in cases tied to immigration enforcement, her curiosity was piqued. The rumors suggested that Boasberg was quietly working to undermine deportation orders that had been signed by President Trump during his first administration. These weren't just any orders. They were directives aimed at individuals identified by ICE as serious threats, people whose removal from the country had been deemed a priority for national security. Leavitt couldn't ignore the implications. If a federal judge was interfering with these orders, it wasn't just a matter of legal overreach. It could be a criminal conspiracy. She began to investigate, starting with public records of Boasberg's rulings. What she found only deepened her suspicions. In several cases, Boasberg had rejected deportation orders, often citing procedural issues or technicalities that seemed flimsy at best. In one instance, he had overturned a deportation order for a man with a documented history of violent crime, claiming the paperwork hadn't been properly filed. In another, he had granted a stay of deportation for an individual who had been flagged by ICE for ties to organized crime, arguing that the evidence presented was insufficient. These rulings didn't sit right with Leavitt. She knew the deportation process was rigorous, with multiple layers of review before an order was finalized. For a judge to consistently find fault with these orders raised red flags. But what really caught her attention was a pattern she noticed in the appeals. In nearly every case where Boasberg had rejected a deportation order, the appeal had been filed by an unknown individual, someone who seemed to have no direct connection to the case. It was as if these appeals were being orchestrated, but by whom? Leavitt decided to dig deeper. She reached out to contacts within the Department of Justice, asking for access to sealed files related to Boasberg's cases. It wasn't easy. Judicial records were often protected, and Leavitt had to navigate a maze of bureaucratic hurdles to get what she needed. But her persistence paid off. After weeks of back and forth, she obtained a sealed file that contained correspondence between Boasberg and an unnamed attorney. The file was a goldmine. It revealed that Boasberg had been in direct communication with this attorney, providing guidance on how to file appeals that would trigger his review of the deportation orders. In one email, Boasberg had even suggested specific legal arguments the attorney should use to ensure the case would land in his courtroom. The evidence was damning, but Leavitt knew it wasn't enough. She needed to connect the dots between Boasberg's actions and the individuals who were benefiting from his rulings. She turned her attention to the unknown person filing these appeals. Who were they, and why were they involved? Leavitt enlisted the help of a trusted investigator, someone with experience in tracking down paper trails. Together, they traced the identity of the individual filing the appeals, a man named Robert Hensley, a low-profile attorney with no apparent expertise in immigration law. Hensley's involvement seemed odd, but what Leavitt uncovered next was even more shocking. Hensley had been in regular contact with Boasberg for months leading up to the appeals. Phone records showed dozens of calls between the two, often late at night. Financial records revealed that Hensley had received payments from an offshore account, payments that coincided with the filing of each appeal. Leavitt's investigator followed the money trail, which led to a shell company with ties to a network of activists known for opposing Trump-era immigration policies. It became clear that Hensley wasn't acting alone. He was a front for a larger operation, one that Boasberg appeared to be directing from behind the scenes. Armed with this information, Levitt knew she had to act quickly. She compiled her findings into a sealed file, one that she planned to present in Boasberg's courtroom. The timing couldn't have been more critical. A hearing had been scheduled in Boasberg's court to review another deportation case, one that followed the same suspicious pattern as the others. Levitt saw this as her opportunity to confront the judge directly, to lay bare the evidence of his misconduct in a setting where he couldn't hide. On the day of the hearing, Levitt walked into Judge Boasberg's courtroom with the sealed file in hand. The room was packed with attorneys, court staff, and a few reporters who had caught wind of something big about to unfold. Boasberg sat at the bench, his expression calm and composed, as if he had no idea what was coming. But Levitt was ready. She had coordinated with the Department of Justice to ensure that her actions were backed by federal authority, and she had briefed President Trump on her findings. The president had given her his full support, telling her to do whatever it took to expose the truth. As the hearing began, Levitt requested permission to address the court. Boasberg, perhaps sensing that something was off, hesitated for a moment before granting her request. Levitt stepped forward, her voice steady and commanding. She began by outlining the pattern she had uncovered, the rejected deportation orders, the suspicious appeals, and the evidence of Boasberg's direct involvement. She held up the sealed file, explaining that it contained proof of the judge's communications with Hensley, as well as the financial transactions that tied him to a broader conspiracy. The courtroom fell silent as Levitt spoke. Boasberg's face, once a mask of judicial impartiality, began to show signs of strain. He interrupted her, his tone sharp, demanding to know the relevance of her statements to the case at hand. But Levitt didn't back down. She turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, the relevance is clear. You have been secretly supporting individuals whose deportation orders were signed by President Trump, and you have orchestrated appeals to ensure those cases came before you. The evidence in this file shows that you instructed Robert Hensley to file these appeals, and you've been working with a network of activists to undermine the president's immigration policies." The weight of Levitt's words hung in the air. Boasberg's composure cracked and he began to stammer, his voice rising in protest. "This is outrageous," he shouted. "I won't stand for these baseless accusations in my courtroom." But Levitt was unrelenting. She opened the sealed file and began reading from the documents, quoting Boasberg's own words from his emails to Hensley. She presented the phone records, the financial transactions, and the connections to the activist network. Each piece of evidence was a blow to Boasberg's credibility, and the judge knew it. As Levitt continued, Boasberg's protest grew weaker. He slumped back in his chair, his face pale as the reality of his situation set in. The reporters in the room scribbled furiously, knowing they were witnessing a moment that would make national headlines. Levitt concluded her presentation by calling for an immediate investigation into Boasberg's actions. She turned to the judge and said, "You're done, Your Honor. The American people deserve justice and they will get it." Boasberg's response was barely audible. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry." But his apology fell on deaf ears. Levitt had already set the wheels of justice in motion. Within hours of the hearing, the Department of Justice announced that it was launching a formal investigation into Boasberg's conduct. Federal prosecutors began reviewing the evidence Levitt had gathered, and sources within the DOJ indicated that criminal charges were likely to follow. The charges could include obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and possibly even bribery, given the financial transactions tied to Hensley. The fallout was swift and severe. Boasberg was removed from the bench pending the investigation, a move that sent shockwaves through the judicial community. Legal experts weighed in, with many expressing outrage at the idea of a federal judge engaging in such blatant misconduct. Others, however, pointed out that Boasberg's actions reflected a broader resistance within certain circles to President Trump's immigration policies, a resistance that had been simmering since his first term. For Levitt, the exposure of Boasberg's secret moves was a major victory. She had taken on a powerful figure and won, proving that no one was above the law, not even a federal judge. President Trump praised her efforts, calling her a true patriot during a press conference. He vowed to continue his administration's crackdown on illegal immigration, promising that those who tried to undermine his policies would face the full force of the law. As the investigation into Boasberg continued, more details emerged. Former colleagues of the judge came forward, revealing that he had expressed strong opposition to Trump's immigration policies in private conversations. One former clerk recalled Boasberg saying that he felt a moral obligation to protect individuals facing deportation, even if it meant bending the rules. These revelations only added fuel to the fire, painting a picture of a judge who had let his personal beliefs override his duty to uphold the law. Meanwhile, Robert Hensley, the attorney who had filed the appeals at Boasberg's direction, found himself under scrutiny as well. Prosecutors began looking into his role in the conspiracy, and there were indications that he might face charges of his own. The activist network tied to the shell company also came under investigation, with federal authorities working to uncover the full extent of their operations. The case became a national story, dominating headlines and sparking heated debates. Supporters of President Trump hailed Leavitt as a hero, arguing that her actions had exposed a corrupt system that was working against the interests of the American people. Critics, however, accused her of overstepping her role as press secretary, claiming that she had used her position to target a judge for political reasons. Some even suggested that the evidence against Boasberg had been exaggerated or misinterpreted, though they offered little to counter the specific documents Leavitt had presented. Through it all, Leavitt remained steadfast. She continued to speak out about the case using her platform as press secretary to keep the public informed. During one White House briefing, she addressed the controversy head-on, saying, "The evidence speaks for itself. Judge Boasberg abused his power to undermine the president's lawful orders, and he must be held accountable. This administration will not tolerate corruption, no matter where it hides." As the investigation into Boasberg moved forward, the judge's future looked increasingly uncertain. Legal analysts predicted that, if charged, he could face significant prison time. The case also raised broader questions about the judiciary's role in immigration policy, with some calling for reforms to prevent similar abuses of power in the future. For President Trump, the scandal was a chance to reinforce his commitment to his immigration agenda, a cornerstone of his administration. Karoline Leavitt, meanwhile, emerged as a formidable figure in the Trump administration. Her actions in the Boasberg case solidified her reputation as a fierce defender of the president's policies, someone who wasn't afraid to take on powerful adversaries. She had proven that she was more than just a spokesperson. She was a force to be reckoned with, someone who could uncover the truth and bring it to light, no matter the cost. In the end, the exposure of Judge Boasberg's secret moves was a turning point. It sent a clear message that the Trump administration would not tolerate interference with its policies, especially on an issue as critical as immigration. For Boasberg, it was a fall from grace, a stark reminder that even those in the highest positions of power could not escape accountability. And for Leavitt, it was a moment of triumph, a testament to her determination and her unwavering loyalty to the president she served.